We often get asked, what does living separate and apart mean for purposes of a divorce, especially because you have to meet the statutory requirements that says the parties must live separate and apart for a continuous period of not less than 6 months, so 6 months or more. And that concerns some people when they think, oh man, I still live with my spouse, can I start the divorce proceedings? The answer is yes. It's an abstract concept that really just is asking, when did you two stop acting like a couple, not necessarily living physically apart? So if you've stopped sharing the same bedroom, you stopped eating meals together, you've been arguing a lot, things that show that the marriage has started to deteriorate and break down, that constitutes living separate and apart. So I'll show you a little bit of what the statute means. So it's referring to this A5 clause of 750 ILCS 5/401. So if you scroll down to the case law, which is where we get the interpretation of what the statutes mean, we can go down up to living separate and apart. So the first thing, people are like, oh man, this is really scary, because the case law back in 1948 said you really did have to live separate, and in 1958 you did have to live separated during that time. That's not how it is anymore. The newer cases, even in 1996, is referring to that the 2-year separation can be satisfied even when they live in the same house, because irreconcilable differences can be realized without people living in separate residences. And then, so first of all, you had an old case law from the 50s and the 60s, and then a more current law interpreting the 2-year separation. That 2-year separation doesn't even exist anymore. Instead, it's that 6-month requirement. So if you go on down to more recent law, 2013 and newer, you'll see that as long as they are able to show that even though they didn't move out permanently within that 6 months period, that prior to the move out, the parties had not had any sexual relationships since 2008 and had been sleeping in separate beds. So there actually hasn't been any new case law that's come out since the current law has been developed. Instead, what we're relying on is just the years, the decades of case law starting to align more with the societal outcomes and reality of how divorces kind of start while people are still living together. It's tough to find a new place to live during that period. And then the new law that ended up getting passed recently, well, absent after 2013, really just kind of starts by saying that we don't have to worry about that quite as much, that living separate and apart. And it even goes on in saying that there's an irreparable presumption that the requirement has been of that 6 months has been met. So if you wanted to show that it hasn't been met, you're entitled to. But we're going to start with the presumption that if you're filing for a divorce, you guys have been living separate and apart long enough to satisfy the statute.